There are some women who walk into a room and suddenly everything shifts around them. Not because they're the prettiest or the loudest or because everybody likes them, but because they command your attention. That energy is ancient. And when we talk about archetypal patterns when it comes to psychology and identity, we refer to that energy as the queen. The queen represents sovereignty and independence. She knows what she wants and she isn't afraid to demand it. She maintains high standards for herself and for those around her. The queen is a master at emotional regulation and she has the capacity to carry great responsibility. She can bring order to even the most chaotic of circumstances. Throughout this series on my channel, I've been focusing on case studies of different women throughout time who've embodied the queen archetype in really different ways. Some mastered it, some misunderstood it, some misused it, and others were able to embody it completely. I've so enjoyed diving deeper into each of these unique women. History has a funny way of reminding you that these women aren't just stories in a textbook. They were real people. And by studying their lives, we can get a better understanding of what power really is and some valuable insights that can help us even in our modern day. Hey guys, it's Got That and welcome to my channel. This is my corner of the internet where I like to talk about feminine psychology, famous faces, and archetypal patterns to study the way that people move through the world and how we can use those insights to create a life we truly love. If that sounds like your cup of tea, I encourage you to pull up a chair and hang out for a bit. I'd love to have you here. You can also give this video a like and subscribe and let me know down below what other archetypal case studies you'd like me to cover in the future. We begin this season of the Queen archetype by looking at one of the most famous leaders to ever live, Cleopatra, and how she was able to craft her own unique brand of feminine power and allure. In 48 BCE, a young Egyptian queen had herself smuggled into a palace, wrapped up in a carpet. And when that carpet was unrolled, Cleopatra emerged in front of Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the Roman Empire. It's one of the most famous stories of the ancient world. And for over 2,000 years, history has remembered Cleopatra as a seductress, a beautiful woman who used men to keep a hold of her throne. But that version of Cleopatra doesn't actually answer something that's really important. How did a young woman from a collapsing dynasty manage to outmaneuver some of the most powerful men in the Roman Empire? The thing is, Cleopatra understood something about power that most leaders never do. And that's because Cleopatra's power didn't come from dominance. It came from understanding people. Cleopatra has gone down in history as one of the world's most famous femme fatales, a seductive, mysterious woman who lures powerful men to their demise. She's remembered for her beauty, her charm, and her ability to captivate anyone that walked into the room. But there's something important we have to remember when it comes to Cleopatra's reputation. Most of what we know about her comes from accounts written by ancient Romans. Rome, the empire whose leaders she humiliated publicly, whose armies would eventually go on to conquer all of Egypt. All of this to say, the people that were writing Cleopatra's story had every interest in making her look like a dangerous woman. But what if Cleopatra wasn't just seductive? Because when we take a closer look at the records, a clearer picture starts to emerge. What if she just understood something about power that the Romans themselves couldn't see? Let's get to know the real Cleopatra. Cleopatra was born around 69 BCE into the Ptolemaic dynasty. It was a group of Greek nobles that had ruled Egypt from the time of Alexander the Great. But right off the bat, Cleopatra started moving through rulership in different ways than her ancestors had. While previous rulers had refused to learn the language of the people they governed, Cleopatra became the first member of her family line to learn the native Egyptian tongue. She would go on to master several other languages, and received a well-rounded classical education in philosophy, rhetoric, and diplomacy. In other words, Cleopatra wasn't just born charismatic. She was well prepared to lead. And soon, those skills would come in handy. Because during Cleopatra's lifetime, Rome was rapidly expanding its empire across the entire Mediterranean, and Egypt was one of its most valuable targets. At the same time that Cleopatra was consolidating her power in Egypt, Rome was devolving into a civil war. And that civil war was going to bring Cleopatra right in front of the most powerful man in the Roman world. Two of Rome's most powerful leaders, Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great, were locked in a battle for control of the Republic. When Pompey fled to Egypt seeking refuge, Cleopatra made a fateful decision. She ordered him executed. Her goals were simple: avoid getting Egypt involved in Rome's conflict, and maybe gain a little favor with Julius Caesar himself. The plan backfired horribly. Caesar was furious, and now Cleopatra stood before the wrath of the most powerful leader in Rome, without a military force strong enough to resist him. And that's when Cleopatra made the move that would change everything. A move historians are still talking about 2,000 years later. You see, instead of fighting Caesar, Cleopatra decided to meet him. She approached him directly, either strolling gracefully into his palace or rolled up in a carpet, if you prefer the more legendary account of the tale. Either way, she eventually made her audience with him and knocked him right off his feet. He was completely taken with her. Her wit, her intellect, her charm. Their political alliance eventually turned into a romantic one, giving Cleopatra even more influence over the Roman emperor. And once Cleopatra had Caesar's ear, and eventually his loyalty too, she was able to leverage that relationship to make some pretty strategic and favorable moves for Egypt. You see, Cleopatra understood that Egypt's military forces were no match for those of Rome. So instead of playing to Rome's strengths, she made the wise choice to play to hers. While the Roman Empire valued dominance, conquest, and military prowess, Cleopatra was able to disarm them by using the skills that she'd been cultivating for her whole life: charisma, wit, insight, diplomacy, and the very presence of a crown leader of Egypt. Roman officials were susceptible to her power because it was so different from their own. They underestimated Cleopatra's influence, and she was able to use that to her advantage. Cleopatra understood that one of the most powerful moves she could make wasn't playing the same game that the Romans were playing. It was to forge her own path forward, to write the rules for herself, and to step fully into her feminine power. Cleopatra didn't threaten Rome with armies. She threatened them with influence. She understood the importance of strategic alliance and relationship building throughout her entire reign. Even after Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra adapted quickly. She soon made alliances with Mark Antony, a powerful Roman general who she would eventually take as a lover too. Cleopatra didn't survive Rome and keep her kingdom safe by being sentimental. She did it by understanding where power was shifting and how to act accordingly. Even when the tide started turning against her, Cleopatra refused to give up on Rome's terms. Rather than waiting for the enemy to come and end her reign, Cleopatra made the choice to end her life on her own terms after Mark Antony's death. Even in defeat, Cleopatra refused to allow herself to become a prop for Roman victory. She decided to take the pen in her hand and be the author of her own story. And that decision reveals something really important about the psychology of power. Cleopatra's story is fascinating historically and insightful psychologically. Cleopatra wasn't powerful despite being a woman in the ancient world. She was powerful because she understood different versions of power that others of her time often overlooked or ignored completely. When thinking about Cleopatra's unique approach to power, two feminine archetypes immediately come to mind: the queen, and the lover. If you're interested in learning more about the 7 feminine archetypes, I have a video on my channel that I'll be sure to link at the very end if you're interested in checking that out too. But for the purposes of this conversation, here's a quick overview. The queen archetype is characterized by independence, grace, and authority. She knows what she wants, and she'll make strategic moves to get there, no matter who's in her way. The lover archetype is about embodying presence, leaning into your natural sense of allure, charm, and magnetism. Cleopatra embodied both of these energies, I'd say primarily the queen and secondarily the lover, to yield meaningful power in the ancient world. As a queen, she was diplomatic, focused, and dedicated to building relationships that would prove beneficial to both herself and her kingdom. And yes, her lover energy certainly took her far. It's pretty widely accepted that her children were fathered by Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, respectively. But contemporary accounts suggest that something more was going on. These men weren't just giving their girlfriends special treatment. They respected her. They admired her intelligence. They valued her insight. And they treated her with more equality than many female rulers had experienced up until that point. While Roman leaders secured their power through dominance, military prowess, and brute force, Cleopatra leaned decisively into her feminine energy when it came to ruling her people. Cleopatra didn't just challenge Rome politically. She challenged their very understanding of what true power was. Independently, both the queen and the lover archetypes are incredibly effective, but combined strategically, they created a signature leadership style that would be remembered for millennia. Cleopatra used the authority, intellect, and decisiveness of the queen, combined with the magnetism, allure, and emotional intelligence of the lover to create a power play that was truly intoxicating. She cultivated a system of undeniable influence that not only allowed her to survive during political turmoil, but to actively shape the outcomes of history. Cleopatra's reign has captivated the public since ancient history. And what makes Cleopatra so fascinating is that women today still combine these same archetypes to move through the world. In our modern hustle culture, women are often pressured to step into their masculine energy if they want to succeed. The dominant narrative sounds something like this: work harder, show up earlier, stay later, and just keep pushing through until you get what you want. But feminine energy can't really thrive in that mentality. Feminine energy requires emotional intelligence, perceptivity, intuition, and feminine power, especially when embodied by the queen and lover archetypes, is a quietly powerful way to cultivate influence in your own life. And that influence shouldn't be underestimated. For modern women, shifting from a state of constant action to one of receptive collaboration, social magnetism, and informed emotional intelligence can be the key to tapping into your own source of power too. Our modern culture often treats success like an arm wrestling match. Whoever pushes the hardest wins. But Cleopatra made the wise choice to play a different game altogether. She treated power like chess. She studied the board. She understood the players. She moved strategically, because sometimes the most powerful player on the board isn't the one who's pushing the hardest. It's the one that knows exactly when to make a move. Cleopatra's story isn't just one about the last queen of Egypt. It's about a woman who understood power and used it in ways that the world wasn't quite ready for yet. Cleopatra reminds us that power doesn't always look like dominance. Sometimes it looks like presence, strategy, influence, and the confidence to move through the world on your own terms. One of the things that made Cleopatra so strategic is that she always understood that beauty and allure were never going to be enough to keep Rome on its knees. She paired her natural feminine magnetism with political insight and strategy, and that was the real key to her success. But not every famous queen archetype has known how to hold on to power once she's achieved it. If Cleopatra is the embodiment of strategic feminine power, Anne Boleyn would go on to become something a little more volatile: charm, ambition, and influence without real security. Let's take a look at Anne. It's a beautiful spring morning in May of 1536. The birds are chirping, bees are buzzing lazily through the air, and the flowers outside the Tower of London are in full bloom. But inside that same tower, a woman sits alone in her chamber, waiting to die. She wears a dark gown and a simple white fur cape. The jewels that once surrounded her are gone. Just a few years earlier, she'd been crowned the Queen of England, one of the most powerful kingdoms in all of Europe. And now, she sat awaiting her executioner. Her name was Anne Boleyn. And for centuries, historians have asked the same question: how did we get here? How did the woman that once held the King of England completely in her power lose everything in just 3 short years? The answer reveals something truly fascinating about power and what happens when a queen archetype tries to step fully into her own in a world that'll never truly allow it. Anne Boleyn is often remembered as a seductress, a conniving, power-hungry mistress that plotted her way to the top only to watch it come crashing down. History hasn't been particularly kind to her. From rumors that she had 11 fingers to accusations of a betrayal so heinous that it was used to justify her execution, Anne has long been painted as dangerous. But here's the thing. Most of what we know about Anne was written by the people who benefited from her downfall. People loyal to Henry. People who were invested in destroying her reputation. Because Henry didn't just want to be rid of Anne. He wanted the world to be rid of her too. So the question isn't any longer, what did Anne do? It's what went so horribly wrong? How does a woman rise that high only to fall that hard? When we really look at the history, we can trace it all back to one key mistake. Something Anne fundamentally misunderstood about power. And that's what we're going to be unpacking today. In the early 16th century, Anne Boleyn was born into a well-respected but not particularly powerful noble family in England. Her father was a diplomat, a man who understood how to navigate the world of power, languages, and culture. And Anne would inherit those same skills. She spent much of her youth abroad, particularly in France, where she received a sophisticated education and developed a sharp sense of social awareness. Anne was never known for being the most beautiful woman in court, but she had something else. She was intelligent, charming, witty, magnetic. There was something about her presence that people just couldn't ignore. And Anne understood something very important very early on: the power of attention. Because in Tudor England, it wasn't just about status. It was about proximity. Who noticed you? Who favored you? Who chose you? And Anne knew exactly how to play the game. Because when she returned to England from France, she didn't just blend into the court. She stood out. And eventually, she caught the attention of the most powerful man in the country, King Henry VIII himself. Now, most women in her position would have followed a familiar path. They would have become his mistress. That was the game. But Anne made a different move. How do you capture the affection of a king who has it all? You create desire. And that's exactly what Anne did. Every time Henry leaned in, she would pull back. Every time Henry would pursue, she would withhold. And what started out as interest quickly transformed into an obsession. Henry didn't just want Anne, he needed her. He was ready to risk it all. His marriage, his reputation, his relationship with the Catholic Church, to make her his queen. And eventually, that's exactly what he did. After 7 years of pursuit, Anne Boleyn was finally crowned the Queen of England. She'd won. At least it appeared that way. But there was a major problem bubbling beneath the surface of her happily ever after. Because what Anne had built her entire relationship around was desire. And desire is not a stable foundation. At first, everything was aligned. Anne was magnetic, Henry was captivated. The chase fueled their relationship. But once that chase was over, everything began to change. Anne would give Henry a daughter, Elizabeth, who would go on to become one of England's greatest monarchs. But she did not give him a son. And in Henry's world, that changed everything. At the same time, Anne was stepping more fully into her role as queen. She spoke her mind. She challenged her husband. She became more assertive, more sovereign. And that was a problem. Because Henry hadn't fallen in love with a queen. He'd fallen in love with a lover. And those are two very different energies. The very same qualities that made Anne so irresistible in the beginning, her wit, her fire, her boldness, were threatening and inappropriate once she gained real authority. And slowly but surely, Henry's desire started to fade. In 1535, Henry shifted his romantic attention to one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting, Jane Seymour. And once that shift happened, Anne's power was no longer secure. Because here's the thing, Anne Boleyn had influence, but she never had any true power of her own. In my last video, I talked about Cleopatra and how she embodied the queen and lover archetypes to rule Egypt. Anne Boleyn embodied a lot of those same archetypes, but in a very different way. Because Cleopatra had power in her own right. Anne did not. Anne's influence came from her connection to Henry. It was relational, not absolute, not sovereign. And that's where everything began to unravel. Because Anne made one critical assumption, one fatal mistake that would end up costing her everything. She believed that once she became queen, she would finally have real, meaningful power. But the system that she was operating in was never designed to give her that. It wasn't built to support her and her interests. It was built around Henry. And Henry hadn't fallen in love with a queen. He'd fallen in love with a lover. And the moment she stopped being that, everything began to fall apart. Anne's power wasn't her own. It was borrowed from the man that she devoted all of her lover energy to. So when his desire disappeared, so did her position. When Anne was in Henry's favor, her queen and lover energies complemented each other beautifully. She was magnetic and strategic, charming but intelligent, fun-loving but composed. But once the lover foundation cracked, the queen had nothing left to stand on. Because the queen archetype needs sovereignty to thrive. And Anne was never given that. Anne built her power like a house of cards. Each move was strategic, each decision carefully placed. But the entire structure rested on one unstable foundation, someone else's desire. And the moment that shifted, everything collapsed. Now, most of us aren't navigating royal courts, but those same patterns of behavior we've been talking about today, still very familiar. building up your identity around someone else's approval, feeling powerful and worthy as long as you're wanted. But the moment that validation disappears, so does your sense of self. Anne's story reminds us of something important. Influence is not the same as power. And power that depends on somebody else is never really secure. Anne Boleyn isn't simply a cautionary tale. She's a woman who saw what was possible and was bold enough to go for it, but was never given the true power she needed to hold on to it. And maybe that's why her story still lingers. Not because she failed, but because she got closer than most of us ever could have. But proximity to power is not the same thing as power. And that's the lesson that Anne learned too late. The real cause of Anne Boleyn's downfall was that she had influence, but not a real crown. Marie Antoinette had the opposite problem, a crown with no meaningful influence to speak of. And that distinction is really important because when we compare Anne and Marie Antoinette, we realize that status and power aren't the same thing. In our next story, we're gonna dive deeper and look at a woman who on the outside seemed to have it all, but could never really step into the role of a leader, Marie Antoinette. It's the fall of 1789. Paris, the city of lights. A city once illuminated by rows of candlelit streets, where warm light flickered against the stone buildings and spilled into the night like something soft and civilized. But tonight, those gentle lights have been replaced with torches. Flames crackle in the dark. Smoke is heavy in the air. The city feels restless, unsettled. And just beyond its borders, thousands of women are marching straight to the palace at Versailles. Their shoes worn thin against the hard road, their stomachs empty, their patience gone. They're starving, angry, and done with the waiting. And inside that palace, just beyond the silk curtains and the gilded walls, Marie Antoinette has no idea what she's going to do. This is the moment that everything begins to unravel. Not because she made the wrong move, but because she never really learned how to make a move at all. She didn't fail merely because she was frivolous. She failed because she could never become what the moment required her to be. You've probably heard the story before. Let them eat cake. Historians are pretty much in agreement that she never uttered these lines. It was propaganda used against her. But in a way, it doesn't really matter whether she said the words or not, because the fact that people believed, even for a moment, that she could, tells us everything we need to know. By the end of her reign, Marie Antoinette had ceased to be a person. She was a symbol, not of leadership, but of distance, overindulgence, and absence. Marie Antoinette wasn't even supposed to be here. Born Maria Antonia of Austria, the 15th of 16 children, she was never expected to rule anything. She was bright, playful, and full of life. She was not particularly disciplined, not especially political, and certainly not equipped to become the Queen of France. At just 14 years old, our young Austrian princess was sent off to marry the future French king. And from the moment she stepped onto French borders, everything about her life changed. Her name, her language, her identity, and the very way she had to move through the world. Before she was ever crowned queen, Marie Antoinette herself had to disappear. And when you remove someone from who they are at such an early stage of their lives, they can't become powerful. Instead, they become untethered. Marie did what many people do when they feel out of place. She distracted herself. with fashion, with parties, with beauty, and with pleasure. Not out of cruelty, but out of escape. Because it's easy to paint her choices as shallow and superficial. But she was a teenager, placed in the center of one of the most powerful courts of Europe, expected to perform, to produce an heir, to represent the nation, before she'd ever been given the opportunity to figure out who she really was. And when the pressures of court became too much, Marie Antoinette created a little world that she could control. Le Petit Trianon, a carefully crafted village of simplicity. Rolling greenery, soft linen dresses, fresh air untouched by court politics. Here, just outside the walls of Versailles, Marie Antoinette could breathe. She could laugh freely, move freely, be something closer to herself. She wandered through the gardens, gathered flowers in her hands, tended to the animals with a quiet kind of delight. For a moment, she wasn't the Queen of France. She was just a young woman playing at a simpler life. And in another world, that would have been harmless. But while she was playing peasants, her subjects were living it. Not as an aesthetic, not as an escape, but for survival. Because as she was reaching for more softness, France was hardening. While she retreated inward, the world around her was collapsing. She wasn't ruling a country. She was avoiding one. France was on the brink of collapse. Food was scarce. Tensions were rising, and the monarchy itself was weakening. In moments like this, people don't just want a figurehead. They want presence, clarity, direction. They want to feel held and supported. But Marie Antoinette just wouldn't step forward. And when a leader doesn't define a moment, the moment defines them. Because Marie Antoinette didn't lack charm. She lacked gravity. And a queen without gravity is just a decoration. Marie lived heavily in her maiden energy. Light, playful, untethered. She loved beauty, pleasure, experience. She brought a much-needed softness to a place that demanded structure. But France didn't need a maiden. It needed a queen. A queen doesn't escape reality. She defines it. She anchors herself in it, makes decisions inside of it, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's heavy. By the time Marie Antoinette tried to step into that role, it was already too late. The people of France had already decided what she was. A symbol, a scapegoat, a target. Because power doesn't wait for you to be ready. It moves along to someone who is. Which brings us right back to that cold October morning in 1789. The people of Paris had finally arrived. Thousands of Parisians, exhausted, starving, and armed, stormed the grounds of Versailles. The palace that at one time had felt untouchable now felt exposed, breached. Inside, everything moved quickly. Voices raised, footsteps echoing through the corridors. A kind of fervent panic that couldn't be contained. And then Marie Antoinette stepped out on the balcony. She stood there, high above the crowd, looking out at the people that she was meant to lead. Faces hardened by hunger, anger, and years of feeling unseen. What do you say in a moment like that? How do you reach people that no longer view you as their queen? She stood there, breath caught, words just out of reach, unable to speak. And in that silence, everything became clear. Not just to the people of France, but to history. This wasn't the beginning of her downfall. It was simply the moment where all of the cracks could no longer be hidden by glamour and aesthetic. And this is where her story gets a little bit uncomfortable. Because Marie Antoinette's greatest failure wasn't that she was given the wrong role. It was that she could never become who the role required her to be. Power isn't just something that you're given. It's something you become. And if you refuse to become it, you don't stay neutral. You become irrelevant. We do this all the time. We step into roles we're not ready for, or we resist the ones we're being called into. We hide in comfort, distraction, and in softness that no longer serves us. And then we wonder why things start to unravel. You can't embody energy that's misaligned with who you are right now. Don't get me wrong. There are very real ways that you can start gradually shifting into energy and archetypes that feel a little less familiar to you. And if that's something you'd be interested in hearing more about, I'd be happy to dive into it in a future video. Marie Antoinette didn't fail because she was too much. She failed because in the moment when it mattered most, she wasn't able to become all that she needed to be. And history, well, it's unforgiving to women who refuse to become. The big takeaway from the life and times of Marie Antoinette is that you can't fully embody energy that's misaligned with who you are. Trying to force it can leave you feeling drained, incompetent, or dealing with a serious case of imposter syndrome. Sometimes there's no escaping the various roles that we're asked to step into in our lives. But trying to escape from those responsibilities instead of finding a way to really embody them will always leave you in over your head. Marie Antoinette was born into status and married into a throne. But a title alone doesn't give someone real authority. Feminine independence isn't something that you're given. Sometimes you'll notice that the women who embody the queen energy most are the ones who had to fight for that title. Our final case study today is on Catherine the Great, a woman who didn't just know how to take power, but how to hold on to it. Today, we're taking it back to the summer of 1762. Outside of St. Petersburg, Russia, a woman sits on horseback, watching, waiting for the perfect opportunity to overthrow an emperor. An emperor who seemed hell-bent on destroying and undermining the very country he was in charge of ruling. Erratic behavior and unfavorable policy had left Tsar Peter III the most unpopular man in Russia. It was widely understood that something needed to be done about this incompetent, childish leader. They couldn't continue to allow him to go on and become Russia's undoing. And that's where our hero comes in. Admittedly, an unexpected ruler. This foreigner who'd adopted Russia as her sovereign and grown to love it like a motherland could not allow this to go on. Our hero is deliberate, calculating, commanding. After forging strategic alliances with some of the greatest forces that opposed Peter, our hero was outfitted with everything she needed to pull off one of the greatest military coups Russia had seen up until that point. The leader of the pack, the hero who was going to save Russia no matter the cost, was someone rather unexpected. Someone who was risking it all to overthrow the inept Tsar. Someone who was closer to the throne than anyone at the time could have imagined. His wife of 17 years, Catherine. Marie Antoinette was born into power, but couldn't hold it. Anne Boleyn reached for power, but couldn't sustain it. But Catherine the Great, she was given nothing and became unstoppable. Some women inherit crowns, and some become worthy of wearing them. Catherine the Great wasn't born powerful. She became someone that power couldn't pass by. Because the queen archetype isn't just something that you're born with. It's something you become. Catherine wasn't even Russian. Born a minor German princess, she was pretty far removed from the center of influence. Not particularly powerful, not especially important, not expected to do anything particularly noteworthy. Just another young woman sent away to a foreign land for marriage. She arrived in Russia at just 14 years old. Completely new language, new court, new customs, new rules she didn't yet understand. But unlike Marie Antoinette, Catherine paid attention. She watched, she listened, she learned. She studied the Russian language until it became her own. She studied politics, not as a pastime, but as a strategy. She quietly observed the court around her. Who held influence? Who controlled perception? And who was actually making the decisions? Catherine didn't just assume that power would fall into her lap. She carefully prepared herself for the moment when it crossed her path. She didn't wait for the court to shape her. She shaped herself for it. Her husband, Peter III, was not built for leadership. Erratic, unstable, disconnected from the people that he ruled. The people of Russia all saw it. And so did Catherine, not from an emotional place, but from a strategic one. Where others just saw chaos and dysfunction, she saw an opportunity. After 17 years in their miserable and volatile marriage, Peter III was finally crowned the Russian Tsar. By the time Peter officially took the throne, Catherine was ready. She had built relationships, earned loyalty, understood the system inside and out. So when the moment came, she didn't hesitate. She moved. The coup was calculated, swift, decisive, ruthless. Just like that, Peter was gone, and Catherine placed herself firmly on the throne as the Empress of Russia. And this is where Catherine really shines, because taking power isn't really the hard part. Keeping it is. Catherine didn't just seize power, she stabilized it. She reformed laws, expanded education, and strengthened Russia's global position. She wasn't just powerful, she was a force of nature. Because taking power is one thing, becoming the very essence of it is something else entirely. Catherine didn't just embody one archetype. Instead, she integrated multiple different powerful feminine energies to secure and maintain her control of Russia. The queen, structure, authority, leadership, the sage, intellect, strategy, foresight, and the huntress, decisiveness, action, timing. She wasn't reacting to power. She was evolving with it. Power stayed with her because she became someone who could hold it. Anne Boleyn had influence, but no authority. Marie Antoinette had a crown, but no grounding. Catherine, she built both. She didn't just step into power. She became it. And this is where her story becomes personal to us. Catherine's life reminds us that it doesn't matter as much who's given in power and influence. What really matters is who makes themselves capable of holding on to it. We see this all the time. People stepping into roles they're not ready to sustain, chasing visibility without building substance first. We take on more than our system can handle and then wonder why the whole thing feels unsustainable. Power doesn't stay where it's given. It stays where it can be held. Catherine the Great didn't rise by accident. She built herself deliberately, strategically, patiently, until she had become someone that power simply couldn't pass by. Power doesn't belong to the women who are chosen. It belongs to the women who become. And this message of empowerment holds true for us too. Because when we're intentional about setting up our inner world to support the outer vision that we have for our lives, we all have the potential to become someone great. These women bore the title of queen in their professional and personal lives. Yes, they lived in palaces amongst the throes of revolution, courtly life, and scandal. But as I hope you see now, the queen energy is so much more than that. The lessons that these women's stories leave behind for us are surprisingly modern, because something I've realized about all of this is that the queen archetype isn't really about crowns. It's about how women relate to power. You may not be ruling a kingdom anytime soon, but we can still take the lessons of the queen archetype and apply them to our everyday life. Setting standards without apology, protecting your peace above all else, leading calmly under pressure, making decisions from a place of self-respect, being generous and kind without abandoning yourself, knowing when to nurture and when to say no. I also think it's important to remember that just like every other feminine archetype, the queen has her shadow side. A queen that's dysregulated can fall into the trap of being too rigid and controlling, maybe a little bit image obsessed as well. And that can certainly be a problem for modern queens too. I think the really big takeaway from all of this is that the goal of embodying queen energy isn't about being a queen over others. It's about stepping into your role as the leader of your own life. And once you understand that shift, everything changes. So the next time you feel uncertain in yourself or feel like you need to shrink to fit into the mold that others have set out for you, I want you to put your shoulders back, straighten your crown, and walk through the world like the queen that you are. If you are still hanging out with me through what I'm sure ended up being quite a long video, thank you so much. I love getting to sit and chat about these topics with you guys. I would also really like to hear if you have any other famous figures, can be from history or pop culture, I love it all, that you'd like me to do an archetype analysis on. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. If you're looking for some more and want to dive deeper into another archetypal rabbit hole, I'm going to leave a link for my lover overview on screen now. It's a little bit spicier, but just as helpful. So I'll see you over there, or I'll just catch you next time. Until then, take care of yourselves. Bye.